An Apache warrior came begging for milk. She breastfed the baby and became the mother he needed. Lone Mesa, West Texas, autumn, 1879. The sky was painted with fire, dusk settling across the dry plains like a silent promise of cold. Inside a modest log cabin perched on the rim of Lone Mesa, Rachel Garrett crouched by the hearth, coaxing a small fire to life. The wind hissed through the gaps in the shutters. She wore her late husband's flannel coat over her dress, sleeves rolled, hands raw from chopping wood that morning. She had just added a handful of dry juniper twigs to the flame when the knock came, rapid, desperate, and unfamiliar. Rachel straightened. Another knock. Harder. She reached for the rifle, leaning near the door, heart hammering. Then came the voice, cracked and pleading. "Please. Milk. My son. He is dying." She froze. Slowly, she unbarred the door. There on the porch stood a tall Apache man, shoulders broad, hair tied back with leather, his eyes dark and unblinking. In his arms, wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket, was a baby, barely breathing, mouth dry and cracked, eyes shut tight. Gasps echoed behind him. A cluster of townsfolk had gathered across the field, lanterns in hand, whispering in fear. "It's an Apache," one woman hissed. "Don't let him in." Rachel didn't move. Her gaze locked on the infant. She saw ribs like ladder rungs beneath the blanket. She stepped forward. "Give him to me." The warrior hesitated. "I have milk," she said. "He will die out here." With solemn eyes, he passed the child to her. So gently it broke her heart. Rachel brought the baby inside and sat by the fire. She unbuttoned the front of her dress, pulled her blouse aside, and guided the baby's mouth to her breast. The child's lips fumbled weakly, then latched. She exhaled shakily. The warmth of the infant's breath against her skin nearly undid her. Tears slipped down her cheeks as the baby began to suckle. The Apache man remained kneeling by the door, unmoving. Firelight flickered over the lines of fatigue etched into his face, over the wound near his collarbone that had crusted with blood and dirt. "You saved him," he whispered, voice raw. "You saved us." Rachel didn't answer. She simply cradled the child closer, rocking ever so slightly. The child's tiny hands twitched. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "Ilan," he replied. "Ilan Nantan." "Ah? No," she said gently. "The baby," he hesitated. "He was born as Taklashim, but we have not spoken his name since his mother died." Rachel nodded, heart clenching. Behind them, a gust of wind slammed the shutter. From outside, voices still lingered, angry murmurs, fear disguised as righteousness. Rachel stood. Still holding the child, she walked to the open door. The townsfolk watched from the dark. "He's just a baby," she said, her voice firm, "and no child starves on my porch." Nobody answered. One by one, the lanterns turned away. Inside, Ilan Nantan slowly unfastened a leather cord from around his neck. From it hung a single feather, broad and streaked with dark tips. He held it out to her. "This is red-tailed hawk. In my tribe, it means protection, for those who give life." Rachel looked at it, then at him. "I didn't do it for thanks." He nodded once. "Still, it belongs to you now." She took it carefully, as if it might burn her fingers, and set it gently beside the baby. The fire popped behind them. The child had stopped crying, his breath was steadier. Rachel looked at Ilan, then down at the boy against her chest. "I do not know what this means," she whispered. Neither do I." "Neither do I," he said quietly. "But he is breathing." And in that silence, the sharp lines of distrust and grief softened, if only slightly. In the flickering glow of the hearth, a warrior and a widow sat quietly beside the same flame, and the sound of a child nursing filled the spaces where fear had lived. They did not speak again that night, but something had begun, something that neither war, nor whispers, nor winter could undo. 1 week later, the days grew shorter, the wind harsher. Rachel Garrett counted time now, not by the sun or moon, but by the sound of knocking at her door just after dawn. Each morning, Ilan Nantan appeared, wrapped in a worn wool blanket, carrying the child Rachel had named Nathaniel. He never stepped inside unless invited, but the baby's cries had softened, his skin no longer pale with thirst. His small hands began to reach for her when he saw her face. Rachel opened her arms, and the child melted against her chest as if he had always belonged there. "You named him," Elon said quietly one morning, watching as she fed the boy in the rocking chair by the fire. "I had to call him something," she said, brushing the baby's soft black hair with her fingertips. "And Nathaniel means gift of God. That feels right, does it not?" Elon's eyes did not meet hers, but he gave the smallest of nods. Later that morning, Rachel set a pot of pinto beans and smoked venison over the fire, slicing dried chili into the bubbling broth. She made cornbread with wild honey she had bartered from a passing trader. When Elon came back to collect Nathaniel that afternoon, she wrapped 2 slices in cloth and handed them to him. "For the road," she said. He hesitated. "You do not owe me more." "I do not give out of debt," she replied. "I give because he is hungry, and so are you." He took it with a quiet nod, eyes flickering toward the boy now curled in a makeshift cradle Rachel had carved from a drawer lined with wool. That night, long after the fire had burned low and the child slept deeply, Rachel stood by the window, sipping the last of her tea. The moon hung silver above the plains. Her eyes scanned the darkness, expecting only the shape of trees and wind-carved hills. But there, beneath the twisted silhouette of a cottonwood, stood Elan, still, silent, watching. She did not light a lamp. She did not call to him. But her breath caught in her throat, not in fear, but something else. Protection. Presence. The next morning, after Elon had taken Nathaniel and vanished into the hills, Rachel went to gather water from the well. When she returned, a small object sat beside the cradle. She picked it up carefully. It was a tiny horse, no longer than her palm, carved from dark cedar. Its legs were bent as if in full gallop, mane flowing with imagined wind. Every curve was precise, its form elegant and strong. Across its back was a tiny leather strip, as if for a rider too small to see. She turned it over. On the belly, carved with a careful hand, were the words, "So he will remember his courage, always." Rachel pressed a hand to her chest. The child stirred in the cradle beside her, gurgling softly. Later that evening, when Elon returned, Rachel met him at the door. "You made this," she said, holding up the horse. "Yes," he said simply. "It is beautiful." "It is Apache," he answered. "The horse is freedom, strength. Our people ride with the sky. My son must know that, even if he grows among yours." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "You can come in," she said softly. He hesitated, then crossed the threshold for the first time. He sat on the floor near the hearth while she cradled the baby. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Rachel glanced at him, then back to Nathaniel. "You are not what they say," she murmured. "I am what the land made me," Elon replied. "But I have never hurt your people, not once." She nodded. "I believe you." Outside, the coyotes cried into the night. Inside, a flame flickered in more than just the hearth. Trust had taken root, not in grand words or declarations, but in small, silent things. A bowl of soup, a carved horse, a man who stood in darkness not to threaten but to guard, and a woman who was beginning to understand that her home had grown not only warmer, but fuller, of something she thought she had lost. Family. The fire had burned low. Outside, wind scratched along the walls of the cabin like an animal trying to get in. Inside, Rachel stirred the coals with the iron poker, watching them pulse red, then dim again. Elon sat across from her, knees bent, hands resting loosely over them. Nathaniel slept soundly in the cradle between them, one small hand clutched around the carved horse. Rachel broke the silence first. "Had red hair," she said, her voice barely rose above the wind. "My son, Elijah. Just a wisp of it, like the color of a burning leaf in autumn. He was 6 weeks old when the fever came." Elon said nothing, but his gaze never left her. "I tried everything. Cool cloths, willow bark tea, I held him against my skin for hours, hoping my warmth could fight the cold taking him. She looked into the flames. It did not. The silence grew long again. My husband left 3 months later, she added. Said he could not stay in a house that reminded him of a grave. Ilan did not move, but slowly he reached into the pouch at his waist and drew out something wrapped in deerskin. He handed it to her without a word. Rachel unfolded the cloth. Inside was a square of rough linen, stained by time. At the center, embroidered in golden thread, was a sun with long spindled rays. The stitches were imperfect but careful, done by a loving hand. My wife, Ilan said. His voice was low and even. She made this for our son's naming day. He never received it. Soldiers came the next moon. She died protecting him. Both gone before the earth turned warm again. Rachel held the cloth as if it were made of glass. In our tribe, Ilan continued, the sun heals what words cannot. That is what she told me once. Rachel swallowed hard. And now you carry the sun. Ilan's jaw tensed. Sometimes I think I carry only shadow. She reached across the cradle, fingers brushing his lightly. You brought him to me, she said. That was light. He looked down at their hands, then back at the sleeping boy. I feared you would turn us away. I feared I had no more to give. The fire cracked, spitting sparks. They sat like that, two people bent by loss but not broken. Not anymore. Rachel folded the cloth again, carefully, and tucked it into the folds of her skirt. I will keep it safe, she whispered. I promise. Ilan nodded. Then, as the wind howled beyond the walls, Rachel leaned her head back against the wooden beam behind her. Ilan shifted, placing another log into the fire. They did not speak again that night. They did not need to. Some silences carried the weight of whole lives, and in the stillness between them, something fragile but strong began to take root. Something that could not be named yet, but was beginning to feel like healing. Word traveled fast in Lone Mesa. By the 4th day, Rachel could feel it in the way people paused on the dirt road outside her cabin, how whispers floated just a breath too loud to be mistaken for passing wind. They say she is nursing a redskin's baby. Not nursing, raising him like he is her own. She has lost her mind. The words drifted like smoke through town, staining everything they touched. That afternoon, the rumble of hooves broke the still air. Rachel was inside, cradling Nathaniel to her chest, when she heard heavy boots hit the dry ground outside. A harsh voice called her name, urgent and angry. Rachel Garrett, come out here right now. She stepped onto the porch, the baby nestled in her arms, one tiny mouth rooting gently against her shoulder. The air smelled of hay and dust. Dick's men stood in her yard. At the front was Amos Dilliard, owner of the feed store, fists clenched and face reddened with rage. Behind him was Caleb Nix and Henry Barlow and 3 others Rachel barely recognized. Their rifles hung across their backs, ready. You are betraying your kind, Amos growled, voice trembling on the edge of fury. Sheltering that Apache, feeding his child. Do you even remember what they did in these parts? You forget the raids? The blood? Rachel looked down at Nathaniel's sleeping face, pale and trusting. I remember loss, she said softly. I do not need reminding what it looks like. He is not one of us, Caleb shouted. That baby is not one of us. He's a child, Rachel said calmly. And he is hungry. She walked down the steps, bare feet against the warm earth, and stood directly in front of the group. The baby stirred, stretching a tiny hand. Without hesitation, Rachel adjusted her shawl, shifted Nathaniel in her arms, and brought him to her breast. Gasps rippled through the men like a cold gust. Their rifles trembled with surprise. Rachel lifted her chin, unwavering. This child is not your enemy, but you are sounding like mine. No one spoke. The air thickened, a silence so loud it thundered. Then, slow, measured footsteps approached from the side road. Rachel watched, wary and tense. Miriam Quinn, widow of the town's first preacher, gray-hailed and sharp-eyed, walked into view. She carried a small, covered pot heavy in her hands. She did not speak as she crossed the yard. She passed the circle of men, past their glares and grumbles, and set the pot gently on the front step. "Chicken stew," she said quietly, "with barley, for the baby, for the mother." She looked at Rachel, then at Nathaniel. "Feed him. That is what mothers do." Then she turned and walked back down the road, head held high and unafraid. The silence that followed was heavier than the midday sun. Amos spat into the dirt. "This is not over," he muttered, voice low, then turned and stormed off. The other men followed, boots kicking dust, leaving only the pot and Rachel's defiance behind. Rachel stood there long after they'd gone, Nathaniel still nursing, his small fingers curling into her shawl. The pot of stew warmed in the late sun. When he finished, she wrapped Nathaniel carefully and carried the pot inside. The stew was still warm. That night, when Elon returned, she served him a bowl without a word. He sat by the flickering lamp, eyes steady and guarded, as he accepted her offering. The cabin smelled of broth and barley, a fragility felt in every quiet moment. He ate slowly, quietly. When he finished, he set his bowl aside and looked at her. "They came?" he asked, voice low. "They left," she said softly. His gaze drifted to the cradle, where Nathaniel now slept soundly. "And the woman?" he asked. Rachel smiled, wearied but resolute. "A stew and a few kind words." Elon nodded once, a deep understanding in his eyes. "Kindness is stronger than fear, but it must be chosen." She placed her hand over his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle, bridging the gap between two worlds. The fire popped softly behind them, embers dancing against the dark cabin walls. And beyond those walls, Lone Mesa was still watching, its judgment lingering like a restless ghost. But inside, a mother, a child, and a man forged by war sat together in a fragile peace, bound by the quiet courage to choose love over fear. They came just after dusk, when the last of the light stretched thin across the dry grass and the wind had begun to change. Rachel knew. The way the crickets went silent, the way Nathaniel stirred in his cradle and whimpered, not from hunger, but from something deeper, as if he, too, could sense the tremor beneath the earth. Ellen was by the fire, sharpening a tool blade. He paused, lifted his head, and listened. Boots, horses, voices. Then came the pounding on the door. "Rachel Garrett, you got one chance. Open up." Rachel stood from her chair, slowly, heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. Elon was already at the door, tall and silent. "No," Rachel whispered, but not in fear, in certainty. She placed a hand on his back. "Let me open it." Elon stepped aside. She unlatched the door and pulled it open. Amos Dilliard stood there, flanked by 6 men, including Ethan Cole, his long rifle slung across his chest, face twisted in something between fury and righteousness. "I warned you," Amos said, eyes darting between Rachel and the shadow behind her. "And now you've left us no choice." Ethan stepped forward, hand over the Apache, and the boy. Rachel did not move. Elon stepped into the doorway. He wore no weapons on his belt, no blade in his hand, but he did not need one. His presence alone was steel. "You do not belong here," Amos said. "You do not belong to her or to that child." Elon looked at him and said nothing. That silence, calm, absolute, was more unsettling than 100 shouted threats. Ethan's lip curled. "Say something, savage, or are you too much of a coward to face what's coming?" Still, Elon did not speak. He stepped forward, just one step, until he was standing between Rachel and the men. His chest rose slowly, his eyes never left theirs. Ethan moved. Too fast. He lunged, maybe to grab the child, maybe to push past Elon. But before his hand reached the doorway, Elon caught him by the wrist, just one hand, unflinching, and twisted it down with enough force to drop Ethan to his knees. The rifle clattered to the ground. The others tensed, but did not move, not with Elon's gaze on them. "You do not own this child," Elon said, voice low but carrying. "You never will." He looked at Rachel, then back to Ethan. "She is his mother, and I am his father." Rachel's breath caught. The fire crackled behind them. No one moved. Ethan pulled back his arm, seething, but did not stand. Amos took a step forward, then thought better of it. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "All of you." Rachel stood taller. "You are not the law here, Mr. Dillard, and neither is your fear." Amos stared at her, then at Elan, then turned. "Let's go." One by one the men followed. Ethan last, rubbing his wrist, muttering curses under his breath. When they were gone, Rachel shut the door slowly, then leaned against it. Elan picked up the fallen rifle and set it gently against the wall. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No," he said, simply. Rachel looked at him. The man who had not drawn steel, not shouted or threatened, only stood his ground with the kind of stillness that came from years of fire. "What you said," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, "was true?" Elan's eyes softened. "What part?" "Bet I am. His mother." Elan reached toward the cradle. Nathaniel stirred, made a small sound, then slept again. "You fed him, you held him, you stayed," Elan said. "No blood makes you more his mother than that." "And you?" she asked. "I was ready to die for him," he answered. "So yes, I am his father." They stood there, the three of them. A woman who once grieved alone. A man who thought his people's story had ended. And a child born into the fire and cradled in the arms of those who chose love over legacy. Outside, the wind shifted again. But inside, the air held steady. And Elon, warrior of the Apache, placed his hand gently on Rachel's shoulder, as if to say, "We do not run from fire. We stand in it together." The moon rose high above the ridgeline, silvering the hills and casting a quiet glow over the little cabin that now held more than just shelter. Inside, the fire burned low but steady, bathing the room in amber light. Rachel stood barefoot beneath the beam that stretched across the ceiling. In her hand was the carving knife Elon had lent her days ago. She gripped it tightly, her other hand guiding the tip to the wood. Letter by letter, slow and steady. Nathaniel, Niel. She whispered the name aloud, carving it deep into the grain of the beam, above the cradle, above the place he now slept, with his tiny fists curled and his breath soft and even. "There," she murmured. "Now the walls will remember too." Behind her, Elon shifted in the chair by the hearth. His face was pale, glistening with sweat. Blood soaked the cloth wrapped around his thigh, where the deer had kicked in a final burst of wild panic. He had carried the animal back regardless. Rachel turned and crossed to him. She knelt, untied the bloodied bandage, and dipped a clean rag into the bowl of boiled water beside them. She worked slowly, gently, her hands steady despite the tremble in her chest. "You should have waited," she said, dabbing the wound. "You should have let me go instead." "I have hunted since I could walk," he replied. "The deer would not have waited for you." She gave a soft laugh. "Stubborn man." He said nothing, but his lips twitched slightly. She finished cleaning the wound and began to wrap it with fresh cloth. Her fingers lingered over the skin, feeling the heat of the fever that threatened to rise. "Elon," she said softly. He looked down at her, his eyes darker in the firelight. "I am not afraid to love you," she whispered. "Not any more." Something shifted in him. His hand rose, calloused and strong, and he laid it over hers where it rested on his leg. "You gave my son a name," he said, voice rough with something deeper than pain. "You gave us both a place." Rachel swallowed the ache rising in her throat. "Elan," she began, but he was already reaching for something around his neck, a cord tied with small, worn beads. He undid the knot and placed it in her hand. It was a necklace, made of corn kernels dried and polished to a soft golden sheen, strung between bits of turquoise and carved wood. At the center was a single white seed, round and perfect. "For you," he said. "So the land will remember you are part of it now." Rachel stared at the necklace. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "What does it mean?" "In our tribe," Elon said, "corn is life. It grows from earth, feeds the people, connects the past to now. This one," he touched the white seed, is rare. It means blessing, continuation. She closed her fingers around it, pressing it to her chest. And you would give this to me? He nodded. You are not just feeding my child, you are planting something that will live longer than either of us. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Then I will wear it proudly. She placed the necklace over her head. It rested against her collarbone, warm from his touch, light but powerful. Outside, the wind rustled the grasses. Nathaniel stirred in his sleep, then settled again. Elon leaned back in the chair, breath slowing as the fever receded. Rachel curled on the floor beside him, her head resting lightly against his knee. We'll plant in spring, she murmured. Corn, beans, squash, the three sisters like your people grow. He looked down at her, his expression softening. And Nathaniel will grow strong with them. She smiled. I carved his name into the beam tonight, she said. So this house will remember. Elon closed his eyes. It already does. They sat in silence, fire crackling, moonlight slipping through the window to meet the soft rhythm of breath and hope and healing. Rachel closed her eyes, fingers curled around the necklace at her throat. And somewhere deep in her soul, something had rooted. Not just love, but belonging. Tomorrow, the world might knock on their door again, with its judgment and fear. But tonight, there was only warmth, and the name carved into the wood above them, and the knowledge that a new family had been born, not from blood, but from courage. And it would not be forgotten, not by the land, not by the stars, not by the hearts that chose it. The sun had nearly set when Miriam's warning came. They are coming tonight. Amos will not wait. Rachel's heart pounded as she hurriedly packed a knapsack, Nathaniel's blankets, a small loaf of bread, some jerky, while Elon wrapped a sturdy leather sling around the baby's cradle. Moonlight streamed through their cabin's doorway, frail but guiding. They slipped out together, Rachel clutching Nathaniel close. Elon crouched low with his rifle. They moved silently toward the timberline at the edge of their clearing, feet striking brittle grass. The forest loomed, a cathedral of shadowed trunks and hush. Elon led them deeper, older trees muffling their passage. Owls called in the distance. Nathaniel whimpered once, and Rachel hushed him, breathing hope into his lungs. They reached the creek, half frozen at this time of year, a ribbon of silver woven through rocks. Elon paused, then signed for Rachel to follow a steep path upward, out of the valley. Nathaniel drifted into light sleep, wrapped close to Rachel's chest. They climbed. But just beyond the creek, moonlight glinted off a rifle barrel. Dozens of shapes tensed on the bank. Amos and his men. They had drawn a trap. Elon pressed Rachel back against a mossy stump, rifle raised, eyes steel. Stay, he whispered. Protect him. Amos stepped forward, a sneer in his lantern light. Come on out, Apache, and the white woman and brat will send you packing. Elon's knuckles whitened around the rifle stock. Rachel clenched Nathaniel and closed her eyes, heartbeat drumming. She thought of the necklace's turquoise, her carved name overhead, the life they were building, and, lost in those moments, Rachel felt her courage rise like dawn. Elon rounded his shoulders, rifle steady, expression fierce. A thin breath of wind slid through the trees. Then a shot rang out, not from Amos's side, but from behind them. A fiery flare of torchlight. A tall figure emerged onto the bank, Reverend Jonas Clay, followed by a man wearing a federal badge. Sheriff Valid, he said briskly. Federal Marshal. Rachel blinked through tears. Elon lowered his rifle slightly, wary yet hopeful. Reverend Clay stepped forward, voice ringing, Back off, Amos. This family is protected. Amos squinted toward them, shock and fury twisting his features. This is a ranger's territory. They lost that war, the marshal replied. This child and his mother and his father are under federal protection. One step further, and you take on the United States. A murmur ran through the men. Amos spat on the ground. We will remember this, he promised. Won't see the last of us. The marshal raised his hand. Leave now, and consider this your only warning. Amos glared at Rachel, at Elon, then back at the marshal. With a final sneer, he motioned to his men. They retreated, boots slapping dirt, camp lanterns bobbing and vanishing. Peña stepped into dignity. Taking a deep breath, Rachel looked up and saw Amos standing. The moonlight returned fully, and the forest sighed. Reverend Clay approached, Reverend's coat dusted with leaves and frost. "Are they hurt?" he asked, urgency softening his tone. Elan knelt beside the creek, under the full glow. He examined his left thigh, torn cloth. A full year had passed since the night they stood by the creek, blood and law mingling in moonlight. Seasons turned over the red hills of Lone Mesa, and Rachel's cabin had grown, not just in walls and structure, but in spirit. A garden bloomed behind it now, and laughter echoed from the porch every morning. Rachel had turned the old smokehouse into a one-room school. Half a dozen children, Apache and settler alike, sat on benches she and Elan built together. She taught them letters drawn in chalk, numbers etched in the dirt, and how to speak to one another with kindness. When they left at sunset, Nathaniel toddled out to meet them, eager to show his painted pebbles or clumsy drawings. Inside the home, Elan carved in silence. Day after day he shaped wood from the tall pines he had felled himself, smoothing the grain with hands that once knew only weapons. The crib he built was sturdy, polished, and beautiful. On its side he etched Apache symbols: wind, protection, and new beginnings. And on a quiet Sunday morning he placed it beside Rachel's bed, his dark eyes glinting with quiet pride. That evening, as the stars pierced the sky, Elan brought Rachel to the fire circle behind their home. Strings of paper lanterns swayed from tree to tree. Wildflowers, braided with sage, lay in baskets nearby, their scent lifting into the warm air. Nathaniel sat on Miriam Quinn's lap, playing with a ribbon. Rachel turned to Elan, curious. He knelt down on one knee, opening his palm. In it was a silver ring, engraved with Apache words that shimmered in the firelight. "You speak with your heart." "Rachel," Elan said softly, "will you live with me, not as mine, but as my equal?" Rachel's breath caught. She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pulled him close. "I am already home." A hush fell over the guests. And then, joyously, Reverend Clay stepped forward, not as minister, but witness, and Miriam lit the first lantern. Their ceremony was simple. Rachel wore a dress, sewn by the Apache women Elan had quietly brought from the hills. It bore beadwork in soft blues and whites, echoing the sky. Around her waist, a sash woven with Elan's tribal symbols. Her hair was loose, wild, with flowers. They stood beneath a hand-built arch of wood and wild vines. No vows were needed, only their hands joined in the firelight. Children tossed petals, and lanterns floated into the sky, glowing like stars drawn down to witness this moment. No longer strangers, no longer fugitives. When the final lantern rose, Elan led Rachel inside. There, he reached for the thick crossbeam above their hearth. With his carving knife, he etched two names side by side: Rachel Nantan, Nathaniel. Then, stepping back, he looked at her and said, "This is our home now." Rachel touched the names, feeling the grooves beneath her fingers. So simple, so permanent. A record not just of people, but of belonging. Outside, the lanterns still glowed. Inside, laughter and warmth. Under the endless Texas sky, two hearts, once broken, once guarded, had chosen not to just survive, but to live together. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of love breaking through fear, or saw yourself in the firelight of two souls choosing each other against all odds, then we invite you to stay with us a while longer. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales like this, where dusty trails lead to unexpected hearts, where silence can mean more than words, and where even the fiercest frontiers cannot stop the power of love. There are more stories waiting out there in the wind. Come ride with us.